Are you ready? Did you light the candle? Okay, let's start the ritual. Welcome to Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I'm your host, Rachel. This is a space where truth gets its voice back because shame loses its power when we speak to it. Here, we don't skip the hard parts. We sit with them and we learn to hold ourselves inside them. This podcast is ritual in audio form, a way for us to bring intention and intuition back into our everyday. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I'm here with a little solo today, which is rare for me, but I thought I would share some stories, share a little story about who I am, my path, my journey. I get a lot of questions about it and how I got into this work, what my past has been like, why I'm so passionate about the work I do. And I think especially because there's a lot of new people here and my business has, I'm meeting a lot of new people every day. People are curious. I want to hear my story, and I'm not going to go into every single detail because obviously that would take a very long time. But I thought I would share a little bit about my path and the trajectory of it all. And if you want more details or more specifics, or for me to go more in depth about specific parts of this, I can definitely do that. But for now, I'm just going to give a pretty brief summary of my life. Not all of it, but I think for me, really will kind of start in high school. So I guess I should say, I grew up in Westchester, New York. Um, I'm really, really grateful for my childhood. I have amazing family, extremely close with my parents. If you've been around here at all, you probably know that, especially my mom. Well, both my parents have been on the podcast, but my mom is a podcast regular, and we now host monthly rituals together at Intuitively Wild. So, but my dad's here a lot too. So I'm very close with my parents. And although I had such a beautiful, privileged, and just immensely magical childhood, it was not always exactly what I needed. I'm not going to go into all the details of that right now, but I will say that starting in high school, I started to experience a lot of anxiety. Um, and I really didn't know how to conceptualize that. I really didn't know what was happening. I definitely didn't know how to express that, um, or that I could talk to anyone about that. I started to have a lot of panic attacks. I separated myself from all my friends, and all social life in general, really. And this is also when I started to first struggle with an eating disorder. Um, and it's a very interesting time when I look back on it because, on the one hand, I was severely struggling, um, and really disconnected from myself and lost and confused. And on the other hand, connecting to myself for the first time in a really long time and really discovering who I was and having the realization that that world and was not like did not feel like home. Didn't feel a sense of belonging. And I was really leaning into my intuitive knowing that like I needed to separate myself and figure out who I was. So it was a confusing time. But from there, I went to college. I went to a small liberal arts school in Pennsylvania. And again, this like really shows me how how much I didn't know myself yet, and also how lost in conditioning and shoulds and expectations I was. Because if I were to be looking at a college now or choosing a college now, A, probably wouldn't go to college, or B, I would go to school abroad, 100%. I would go to school in Europe. That just was not the right environment for me. It was not right for me. But it was fine at first. And then like second semester of freshman year, I really started to struggle. Again, my anxiety, it's not like it ever left, but it returned with a vengeance. And my eating disorder was definitely still present, although it took a different shape, and um, I had a different relationship to it, but still didn't really understand it or even know it was there. Um, and yeah, just again, had this season of really shutting down and closing in on myself. And I really wanted to quit school. I wanted to start to pursue yoga. Oh, because when I was in high school, like senior year of high school, I would say I found yoga, and it did really, really help me. And that followed me into college, and I fell in love with it more and more. And so by the end of freshman year, I really wanted to quit school and start to pursue yoga. My dad was like, absolutely not. There's no way that is happening. Um, so I finished school, and I'm very glad I did, but I got through it in the using the tools that and the resources I had, that using what I had in my control to make it the best experience possible for myself, which was one, switching from a psych major to an English major. Because although in some environments psychology would have been the perfect major for me, I didn't like how it was taught at my school, and I just needed to like not ever take another test, like ever, um, or do statistics. So I switched to English, and from a very, very young age, English has always been my thing. Reading and writing have always been what I've loved. And so, yeah, I made that decision. That helped a lot. And then I also made the decision to study abroad as much as possible. So, second semester of sophomore year, I went to South Africa. Second semester of junior year, I went to Australia. And I did an interim trip during my senior year to Hawaii. And also, every summer I traveled. So after my freshman year of college, I went to California to work. Um, After my sophomore year, I went to Florida and worked at a yoga studio. And after my junior year is when I did my first full teacher training. And then after my senior year, when I graduated, I decided to move to Hawaii and pursue teaching yoga full time. And this is something I knew I wanted to do for a really, really long time. I had my heart set on it. My intuition just like knew, and I knew which island I wanted to be on. I knew where I wanted to be. I knew what yoga studios I wanted to teach at. It still to this day is like the experience I saw in my head so clearly, and just knew exactly what I wanted and what was meant to happen. Um, and it did all happen. I moved to Hawaii. I was teaching yoga full time. I mean, it took some time for sure to build that up. And I was working at the local health food market part time before I was teaching full time. And I'm really grateful I did that because I got to meet a lot of locals and make a lot of friends and just get immersed in the community, which in Hawaii, and I was on Kauai, which is the at the time at least was the least populated island. Um, and it can be hard to kind of break your way into that community. And it was, but I think working at the Healthy Hut was very helpful. And I was the barista, so I was making the lattes and the smoothies and all that kind of stuff. And it was fun. And then it wasn't, and then I left, and I'm glad I left. But then I was teaching yoga full time, and yoga very quickly became my whole life. And I also did several trainings while I was in Hawaii. Um, but this was when also my eating disorder started to come back in a shape that was more harmful again. I would say in college, the shape it took was one that I could still live my life in a certain way, or like be semi-healthy in a certain way. And in Hawaii, there were parts of it that became stronger that were really more harmful. Um, so but again, I still didn't have the words for it. I still didn't have the awareness around it. Um, and but I did start to have this intuitive knowing that my time in Hawaii was coming to an end. I wasn't loving certain ways that the yoga world looked there, for primarily being that it was very aesthetic based. People really wanted a workout. It was very who knew who. And um, yeah, I was feeling more pulled towards a different way of being. And you might think that in Hawaii it would be slow and everyone would be chill and living a certain kind of lifestyle. And some people were, but for me, it was very much like um, I was burning myself out. There's a lot of details to that chapter. But then my friend told me about yoga therapy and how you could go to like grad school, the yoga equivalent for in yoga therapy. And so I started to do some research, found this school, applied, and then when I got in, I moved to California to go to yoga therapy school because this was pre-COVID, so everything was in person. So I moved to California and started that school in Encinitas. And there were a couple of months in, um, I things really started to kind of escalate for me with my eating disorder. And February of 2020, I started treatment. Um, and again, so many details to this part, to all the whole story. But yeah, started a treatment, and it's when then COVID hit in March, and my so I took a leave of absence from my school, but it didn't really matter that much anyway because once COVID hit, they had to kind of like take a pause and figure out how to do everything virtual. And everyone was freaking out about quarantine and COVID, and I was like, well, I am in residential treatment. I can't leave this facility, so I'm already in quarantine, so it's fine. So my COVID experience was quite different than most people's because pretty much the majority of it, at least when it was at its height, I was in treatment. Whether that was residential or PHP or IOP, those are all different levels of care. And so some I lived at home, some I lived in the facility, but regardless, I was in a different experience. Um, so yeah, that was quite a large chunk. It's pretty much like 3 years that my focus was recovery. Luckily, everything from my grad school switched to virtual. So during certain points of that chapter, I was able to continue my grad school or my yoga therapy school and eventually finish and graduate. Um, and then once I finally successfully discharged from a treatment center, I was in a better place. I was doing much better. I again had this intuitive knowing that it was time to leave. I had been in California for 3 years. The whole time I had either been really struggling or just so focused on treatment and recovery. Um, and so it was time to go. And also, I had started at this time to realize that yoga had played, although it's been like a foundational component of my healing, it also has, in certain aspects, been really harmful. Oh, I should say, in between moving from Hawaii to California, I did 2 months in Thailand for my advanced teacher training. Um, and um, I'm really grateful for that experience, learned a lot. We focused a lot on pranayama. And so, yeah, it was amazing, but I was so sick with my eating disorder. So there was that in between. Um, yeah, I started to, oh, okay, what I was going to, hard to tell the story in a linear fashion, and not going into all the details. I started to realize at my end of my time in California how much yoga had harmed me in certain ways, and knew I needed to not have my life fully immersed in the yoga world in the way that it was. So I also started to get really interested in herbalism. And I don't even remember how. Again, with these things, I just ended up where I needed to be. Um, and I just knew I needed to start studying plants. So I did my first certification uh, as, as an herbalist. And it was all virtual. It was wonderful. I loved it. And I knew I wanted this to be a core part of my life. But I also knew that I needed to study more and deeper and that I really wanted an in-person experience. And I applied for this apprenticeship in England, and I really wanted to go to Italy, but I speak no Italian. And so learning about herbalism from someone who probably only spoke Italian, because the only things I could find, they were Italian speakers. Um, yeah, so I chose England. I really, really wanted to go to Europe. I'd never been to Europe before. All my travels had been to other places. Um, and so I just made it happen. So I went to England for my herbalism apprenticeship. It was a wonderful experience. And that's really where I fell in love with a different kind of way of living. It's where I found more seasonal living. It was the first uh, time experiencing all the seasons for after a few years of living in Hawaii and California. Um, and I realized how much I needed the seasons and how my prior aversion to winter was my aversion to my internal winters and my internal darkness and my fear of slowing down and so much that I had to work through. And so that it was in England for a year. My experience with the seasons, it really healed me in so many ways. I was living in the countryside in the Cotswolds, and so my neighbors were the cows and the chickens. And the second half of that year, I was living on a farm, and I literally had chickens right outside my door, um, and cows that the cows were the traffic, um, quite literally. And it was so wonderful. Really taught me to slow down, reshaped my relationship with nature, and helped me find myself again in a whole new way, and also relearn who I was, because after going through quite some time of treatment and being in recovery, I was just realizing I was learning about who I was really in a new way for the first time, and realizing how much my eating disorder had been a core part of my life for so long, a core part of my identity. And so now I had to learn who I was without it and in a whole new season of my life. And that was terrifying, and really challenging. And I'm so grateful I had that year in England to do that. That time was a very solo time. I um, made a few friends and um, went on some random dates. But for the most part, if I wasn't with my apprentice, like with my mentor at my apprenticeship, I was by myself. Um, and I got to travel to Paris by myself and Italy and take all different little excursions. But yeah, it was an interesting year. And then it was over. And I knew the apprenticeship was a year, but I didn't really know exactly how long I would be there. But after that year was coming to a close, I was ready. And when I moved home, I really could have, oh, and while I was there, I I did my first certification for human design. I'm just laughing at myself because of just like patterns, I guess. Um, I had known about human design for years and years and years and had always been really interested in it, but there was just some point um, when I was there where I was like, I need to do this. And that's how things really happen for me. It's like sometimes things are orbiting around me, or I have these like thoughts in the back of my head, or like feel like I should be doing this, or sometimes it's like I know I'm going to do this, but not yet. And then all of a sudden something drops in. I'm like, I need to do it, and I need to do it right now. And when I need to do it right now, like I need to do it and it's going to happen. Like no one can stop me. And if there's one thing people close to me know about me, it is that once I know I need to do something, you best believe I'm doing it. So I did my human design, I did human design training while I was in England. So when I was leaving England, I really could have moved anywhere. I knew I was going to pursue starting my own business fully, um, because while I had, so when I was in California, I first came up with the name Intuitively Wild. But that was because I wanted to start sharing some of my writing. And I created a blog and then eventually went on Instagram and was sharing some of that. But I wasn't yet, it wasn't until I was leaving England where I was like, okay, I'm going to really start to make my own business. I knew at that point, it was going to be pretty much all online. So I moved to North Carolina. And again, that was like such an intuitive, I don't know. I remember I couldn't really decide where I wanted to go, and I was having a little bit of a meltdown, and there was just a lot happening for me. And my parents were visiting me in England. It was the middle of winter, and all of a sudden my dad was like, there's so many places you could go in closer to us in America that you would like. And he started listing all these places, and he said Asheville, North Carolina. And I was like, huh, I think that's the place. Um, to this day, it's the one place that I've gone and followed my intuition to and don't know why. Uh, I loved the land there, like the nature and the hiking in the mountains, and felt very at home when I was in nature. But Asheville itself, I just really, I don't know, it really didn't feel like home. I didn't feel settled there. But it is where I started my business. It's where I started my podcast. Um, I was able to do some local events, doing human design readings and mini herbal consultations, and I started selling my products, and yeah, that's for a while I was really focusing on selling like physical products, both in person and online at markets and stuff. Um, but I really, yeah, I didn't feel at home there. I wasn't I think it's so interesting to me because every single place I've traveled, I've been able to find a sense of home, and feel like there's a reason I'm there and feel really at peace. But I didn't feel that same sensation in Asheville. And so it was the closest also I've been to my parents in New York for a really long time. So I started coming back a lot more, and I started exploring upstate a little bit. And that is when I had this realization for the first time of, oh, wow, New York is more than just Westchester and the city, and maybe I actually really like it here. And so I made the crazy decision to move to New York. Um, it's crazy because I really thought that I could say with so much confidence, that I would never move back to New York. Like if there's one thing I thought I could say, for sure, it would be that. So it also took kind of a reckoning, to make that decision. And yeah, it really, my intuition brought me through each chapter. And when I was in New York, I also found this teacher who I did my tea ceremony training, found that very intuitively. I I was following this herbalist, who I really love, and she shared that she was doing her tea ceremony certification course for the first time online. And so I immediately, the second I saw, like, I didn't even know what tea ceremony was. I just saw her announce that, and I was like, oh, I need to do that. And that changed my life. That connected me to plants in a way that my herbalism hadn't, because it brought in that spirituality aspect. It brought in the ceremony and the intention, and it really forced me to slow down and form a relationship with the plants by like being still with them. And I had done that during my apprenticeship in England. My first assignment from my mentor was to go out and find eyebright. It's a plant growing wild in the forest, and sit with it and meditate with it and draw it and have a conversation with it. So I definitely did that work in England, but the tea ceremony, it's the ceremony of it all. The ceremony, it feels even more immersive. And I really was able to, by the steps of the ceremony, the ritual of it, the regularity of this one practice that I kept deepening and deepening, and the way it forced me to be still and forced me to slow down. Yeah, I really cracked something open within me. And that also, during that similar time period, I started working with my teacher, who I'm still working with to this day, in my priestess training, which is not something I necessarily share about a lot because I think people have different like preconceived notions about what that means, and most people don't know what that means. But I'm really working really closely with this teacher for um, almost 2 years now in my priestess training. And that changed, like that's everything to me. And I realized how the thread that has woven all of my life together is ceremony and ritual, even when I didn't know I was in ceremony, even when I didn't know I was doing a ritual, even when I didn't know I was connecting to my intuition, and even when I didn't know that I was living in alignment with nature, or that I felt so called to be of service, that was what my life circled around. And this training really um, let me see it all in a new light. Um, that's a whole other conversation, so I won't go into that too much, but it brought everything together for me, and it helped me understand who I am and where I'm going and the work I want to do in the world, and how I want to impact the world. And it allowed me to start to be more present with my intuition and to bring more intentionality into my life because of this level of presence. Um, and that kind of brings me to today, because through that restructuring of my life, um, I was able to hear my intuition when it told me to open this business, and trust it and trust myself and have faith in myself and take that brave step, and to have the rituals in place to support myself through that. And so, my yoga therapy / my yoga practice and everything that goes into that bucket. So that's asana and pranayama and meditation, all of those practices. There's that. There's human design, how it helps me understand myself and kind of like orient myself to the world, how it helps me understand relationships and energy. There's plants, my relationship to them, how they support us, and there's seasonal living, and there's tea ceremony, and there's ceremony and ritual in general. And then there's just being a human and walking the world, how I like to say, on my priestess path, which for me means being clear, like empty-minded, and not in the way of just like, ditzy, but empty-minded, like not open, um, not attached, stripped, just clear, clear and centered and grounded, and able to receive the world and speak from a place of trust and truth and confidence versus conditioning and projections and judgment. And really walk through the world in that way, clear-minded and open-hearted. And that kind of leads me to today. Um, and that's my foundational intention with all that I do and with Intuitively Wild, is to just continue to walk clear-minded and open-hearted and trust what comes through me and trust what I know I'm meant to do, and just follow that day by day and step by step. Obviously, a lot more detail in this, and maybe this wasn't helpful or interesting at all, but and there's a lot more I could say, but for sake of time, I'm going to leave it there. Again, if there's any specific questions that you have or any part of the story you want to hear more details about, I'm definitely open to share. But that's how I got to where I am in some ways. And I will say also that all those modalities and practices that I mentioned are also the ones that help me support my mental health and help me maintain my recovery and prioritize my recovery, help me understand and navigate my anxiety when it still arises, because it definitely still does, and just how to be the best human being that I possibly can. Yeah, okay, I'll leave that here for now. Would love to hear from you guys. Would love to hear your stories and more about what got you to where you are and how you understand yourself and navigate life. And we will speak again soon. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.